Let's talk about that speech last night, the State of the Union that wasn't really a State of the Union. Let's talk to Ron Johnson about the budget process. Brandon Gill joins us tonight. And Jordan Schachtel, some foreign policy talk. Next.
And to my fellow citizens, America is back.
I enjoyed it. I'm not even one for political speeches. I'll be honest with you. I hardly ever watch them. But since this was I call it a State of the Union. I realize it wasn't a State of the Union, but that's what it was. Since Trump was speaking and it was his first one, I decided I would sit down with my wife and we put our feet up and we watch it, see what we liked, see what we didn't like. And again, I don't like political speeches. I loved it. I thought it was wonderful. I thought there were so many wonderful moments last night for a variety of reasons. One of the main reasons I loved it so much was I'm mindful of how many people aren't like you, aren't like me, that don't pay attention really that much. You don't realize how hyper-informed you are, how much more informed you are than other Americans until you sit down and talk to normal people. And I don't live in Washington, D.C. I don't live in New York City. I don't run around with politicians and other people on TV or radio. I run around with normal people. And I sit down and have a conversation. We're playing horseshoes. It's game night, church, whatever. They don't know anything. Nothing. All the stuff you know, they don't have any idea. And so Trump, he did this a lot last night, really laid out a lot of things that have happened, things you knew, things I knew, but things that the norms and normas needed to hear. And look, right off the bat, pointed a big old fat finger at Democrats and really dropped the hammer on them saying, yeah, how'd arresting me work out?
And we've ended weaponized government where, as an example, a sitting president is allowed to execute his political opponent, like me. How did that work out? Not too good. Not too good.
And let's talk about that for a moment before we get on to the rest of the speech, because have you seen the numbers for the speech, the approval numbers? I was honestly shocked. Because the country is very evenly divided. We love to believe that we are this gigantic majority and that all communism has been rejected by the American people, but that's simply not the case. It's, 51-48. It's always right about in there. Let's talk about that. The approval numbers for Donald Trump's speech are in the 70s. The last number I saw was 76%. And when you go down the issues, as you're talking about what you care about, did you think it was hopeful? They were all close to 70%. The American people, not just you, not just me, the American people loved what they saw last night. So let's just discuss the lawfare really quickly, shall we? What Democrats did was horrible. It was evil, frankly. It was third world banana republic stuff. You know all that stuff. And the American people rejected it. And we should not discount that. Because if Democrats had done what they did to Donald Trump and it had worked, they would be more encouraged to do it to the next Republican nominee. There is a chance that having arrested Donald Trump, all these felonies, things like that, having watched that backfire on them so badly, there's a chance that Democrats won't do it again because it backfired politically. The American people watched what they did, and they were not swayed to the left. They were swayed to the right. The American people, as uninformed as many of them may be, still instinctually knew this is evil, this is wrong, this cannot stand. And that was good. And it was nice watching Donald Trump bring it up again, because we cannot allow America to forget the evil of the last 4 years. We cannot allow them to forget, because people tend to forget. Now, speaking of the hyper-informed stuff, you watch I'm Right every night, I'm sure. You are well aware of the government waste. You are most definitely aware of all the things DOGE has been uncovering, where your money, where my money has been going. But your normie neighbor, he doesn't really understand. He doesn't spend his day consuming politics, figuring out the news. Donald Trump, knowing he had a lot of eyeballs on him last night, laid out some things the American people needed to hear.
Just listen to some of the appalling waste we have already identified. $22 billion from HHS to provide free housing and cars for illegal aliens. $45 million for diversity, equity, and inclusion scholarships in Burma. $40 million to improve the social and economic inclusion of sedentary migrants. Nobody knows what that is. $8 million to promote LGBTQI+ in the African nation of Lesotho, which nobody has ever heard of. $60 million for indigenous peoples and Afro-Colombian empowerment in Central America. $60 million. $8 million for making mice transgender. This is real.
As you saw, he injected humor. It was endearing. And he laid out what Democrats have done with your money and are still doing with your money. And I know you knew it already, but it was so nice to hear him lay that out for the American people. And let's talk about Democrats for a moment. In fact, let's focus on them for a few. I know they will come back one day. We've talked about this before. You know this. No one's down forever. Republicans will be out of power. They'll lose an election, and Democrats will all run to the television and say, wow, we're going to have power forever. They'll never come back. But that's not true. And Republicans do the same thing. We win an election, and we lie to ourselves and convince ourselves that the other side is out, and they're down, and they're gone forever, and we never have to worry about that again. But that's not true. So I know Democrats will come back. They could come back in 4 years. I don't know. 4 years is a long time in politics. But right now, they are a party that is completely lost. And they are lost in part because of the Trump derangement syndrome that has been concrete. It's been cemented into their mentality, where no matter what he does, even when he takes a stance on something that is popular with virtually everybody, they feel obligated to their base to oppose it. And Trump, knowing how they would conduct themselves last night, let the American people know. He basically said, hey, watch these dirtballs. Watch how un-American they are just to oppose me.
This is my fifth such speech to Congress. And once again, I look at the Democrats in front of me, and I realize there is absolutely nothing I can say to make them happy or to make them stand or smile or applaud. Nothing I can do. I could find a cure to the most devastating disease, a disease that would wipe out entire nations, or announce the answers to the greatest economy in history, or the stoppage of crime to the lowest levels ever recorded. And these people sitting right here will not clap, will not stand, and certainly will not cheer for these astronomical achievements. They won't do it, no matter what. Five times I've been up here. It's very sad, and it just shouldn't be this way.
You know who loves to hear that stuff? Norm. He does. Because they're not as partisan as you and I are. Norm, he wants to see the American people stand for good things. Norm and Norma, they may not agree with you and I. In fact, they don't on all the issues if we were to go down the list of taxes and spending and abortion and things like that. But they want people to stand up and cheer for basic humanity, basic good things. Look, I'll be honest, you know I'm probably a little rough around the edges and not exactly the most emotional human being on the planet. But there were moments last night, I got a little misty. When Donald Trump was talking about Jocelyn Nungary, that 12-year-old girl who was savaged by those barbarians Democrats brought into the country on purpose, and when he announced that there was a wildlife refuge that he was naming after her, it tugged at me. It was beautiful. It was a beautiful thing to do for that mother. Can you imagine the heartbreak? I can't. I can't imagine the heartbreak, but it was a beautiful thing to do, a way to memorialize her daughter permanently. It was wonderful. Who wouldn't want that? But I mean, look, maybe you can make the argument that because it was an illegal who did it, and Democrats know they have to love barbarians, maybe they can't stand and cheer for that. Okay, maybe if I even gave you that one, fine. But that adorable 13-year-old boy he's got brain cancer. He's been fighting brain cancer for years. And in a moment, I'll tell you, I had to pretend like my allergies were kicking up. In a moment where he gets his Secret Service badge and he gets acknowledged in front of everybody, I'll tell you what, my wife, who's not a crier either, was a freaking wreck. She was reaching for the tissues. It was just so touching. Democrats so lost, so committed to opposing everything Trump does, couldn't even stand for that.
Joining us in the gallery tonight is a young man who truly loves our police. His name is DJ Daniel. He is 13 years old, and he has always dreamed of becoming a police officer. But in 2018, DJ was diagnosed with brain cancer. The doctors gave him 5 months at most to live. That was more than 6 years ago. And tonight, DJ, we're going to do you the biggest honor of them all. I am asking our new Secret Service Director, Sean Curran, to officially make you an agent of the United States Secret Service. Thank you, DJ.
They couldn't even get up and clap for a kid who probably won't be with us for a long time. Getting an honor like that, I mean, golly, I about got choked up again just watching it again. And it's not just that they couldn't stand up for it. You had these vile little monsters like Nicole Wallace on television, just so poisoned, so full of bitterness, saying things like this.
But I think this was a lesson in finding one thing that you let yourself feel. And I let myself feel joy about DJ. And I hope he's alive for another, 95 years, right? And I hope he lives and the life he wants to live. He wants to be a cop. He knows what he wants to do. And maybe when you have childhood cancer, that crystallizes for you. And I hope he has a long life as a law enforcement officer. But I hope he never has to defend the United States Capitol against Donald Trump's supporters. And if he does, I hope he isn't one of the 6 who loses his life to suicide. And I hope he isn't one who has to testify against the people who carried out acts of seditious conspiracy and then live to see Donald Trump pardon those people.
I call communists anti-humans for a reason. It's just what they are. I've told you before that the reason these people have killed so many people in the last 100 years, it's just amazing. Wherever they go, they're like a disease. Wherever they go, people die in droves. The reason is not that they don't care about human beings. They despise them. They despise them. There's nothing good in them left. It's a sick, demonic religion. It is, and they're normally better at hiding it than the modern Democrat Party has been now. They can't get out of their own way. And look, Donald Trump's presidency sits right now at about 52% approval rating, depending on what you look at. That's good. That's not world-changing good, but it's very, very good. We've seen presidents. Joe Biden was dipping way down in the 30s. Democrat Party approval, last time I checked, was in the low 30s because of this stuff. They can't hide their demonic nature anymore. It's amazing to see. And setting that aside, let's just talk about the border as we wrap this up here. We have a great show for you tonight. Democrats brought all those animals into the country on purpose. Laken Riley, Jocelyn Nungaray, but those are just the two cases we know about. Case after case after case across the country. Murder, rape, robbery, murder, rape, robbery. American citizens being pillaged by third world barbarians that Democrats brought into the country on purpose. Remember, it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a whoopsie. And it's important that Donald Trump continues to remind the normies and normos of the United States of America that Democrats brought barbarians into your country as fast as humanly possible to rape and murder your citizens. And Donald Trump dropped this gem last night about it.
The media and our friends in the Democrat Party kept saying we needed new legislation. We must have legislation to secure the border. But it turned out that all we really needed was a new president.
Remember that. Remember that the next time your friend gets frustrated with Republicans and considers voting for Democrats. I get frustrated with Republicans all the time. You watch me get frustrated nightly on this show. You cannot vote for a party that will purposely import barbarians into your country as fast as possible. You simply cannot. Oh, and just a little reminder as I wrap this thing up, we want to move on here and we're just going to talk about Al Green getting kicked out and things like that. Just a reminder that Republican Senator from the red state of Oklahoma, James Lankford, he tried to pass a massive Democrat amnesty bill under Joe Biden and insisted that it was necessary to secure the border. Red state Oklahoma, let's do better next time, shall we? All that may have made you uncomfortable, but I am right. We have a great show for you tonight. Let's talk first about buying American. There was a lot of talk about that last night because Donald Trump is big on that. Being pro-American. You know Pure Talk? I tell you about them all the time, the mobile company Pure Talk. You know when you switch to Pure Talk, when you have to get a hold of somebody at Pure Talk, you'll notice something. It's bizarre, sadly. The person you're speaking to speaks English. They almost sound American. It's not supposed to be that way. You're supposed to be routed to a call center in India, not at Pure Talk. They hire Americans right here at home. Not only will Pure Talk save you a fortune, not only are they on the same 5G network, they hire Americans. I love it. Switch to Pure Talk. Takes 10 minutes. puretalk.com/JesseTV. We'll be back.
Single largest one-month gain ever recorded, a 41-point jump.
Members are directed to uphold and maintain decorum in the House and to cease any further disruptions. That's your warning. Members are engaging in willful and continuing breach of decorum, and the chair is prepared to direct the Sergeant-at-Arms to restore order to the joint session. Mr. Green, take your seat. Take your seat, sir. Take your seat. Finding that members continue to engage in willful and concerted disruption of proper decorum, the chair now directs the Sergeant-at-Arms to restore order. Remove this gentleman from the chamber.
They're just so dumb. Joining me now, Congressman Brandon Gill from the great state of Texas. Congressman, look, I understand that Democrats are insane people. I get that, but that's not appealing to anybody in America. I just don't even understand politically what the strategy is here.
No, and first of all, thank you for having me on. Frankly, I don't either, and I don't think the American people do either. You know, this was a joint session, joint address to Congress. This was a stately, formal occasion that requires a certain level of decorum. And what we saw last night from House Democrats, and in particular, Representative Green, was disgusting. That was attempting to interject during the speech. I mean, my question for Democrats here is, what about the Trump agenda do you not like? Do you not like extending tax cuts for working class Americans? Do you not like a secure border? Do you not like getting the woke and weaponized administrative state under control? Do you not like getting boys out of girls' sports? I mean, what exactly is it that would cause you to be so rancid and uncontrollable that you're going to shout down the President of the United States during an historic address? You know, it was disgusting and it was unbecoming of a congressman.
Yeah, it really was. They did themselves no favors last night. And speaking of doing themselves no favors, there was a hearing today, the hearing heard round the world, where all these dirty commie mayors of sanctuary cities had to show up in Congress and try to defend the fact that they're hiding rapists and murderers from ICE. And you had it out with one Brandon Johnson. What happened today?
Well, we had this hearing with several sanctuary city mayors, and that included the mayor of Chicago, Brandon Johnson. And I simply wanted to clarify for the record what his view was on illegal aliens in his cities. For instance, does he agree that illegal aliens should receive taxpayer-funded abortions? Does he want illegal aliens to have voting rights? Does he want illegal aliens to be serving on government advisory boards in his city? And the short answer to all of those questions and more is yes, he does. And this is a great example of Democrats who are specifically putting the interests of illegal aliens before the American people. His city has spent millions of dollars, and his city is broke on illegal aliens. This is a major problem. His own people are being murdered and raped and pillaged by these foreigners that he has allowed into his city, and that he is providing aid and abetting and not working with federal law enforcement to get rid of. This is disgusting, and we put him on the spot to answer for it.
Can you just tell us real quick, where are we on the budget process? I know there was a House one, then there's a Senate one, and then there's a reconciliation process, and it seems to be going back and forth, and there's some disagreement there. Where are we at in all this?
Well, as you know, with regards to reconciliation, this is a procedural maneuver to get around the 60-vote threshold in the Senate so that we can pass a conservative budget and the conservative agenda. This is what unlocks the Trump agenda. It provides funding for border security, funding to plus up our military after 4 years of Joe Biden, and it helps unleash our energy policy, among other things. Now, the House passed a budget resolution a couple weeks ago. The Senate has their own version. The president has been very clear that he wants one big, beautiful bill, which means that he prefers the House version of the reconciliation bill, not the Senate version. So the ball is in the Senate's court right now to get this budget resolution passed, the House version, that is. And we'll see what they do. I think that we need to expedite this process as quickly as possible. The American people are begging for tax certainties, as are businesses. And Tom Homan and the rest of the executive branch needs money now for the border. So we've got to get this thing going. But the House version of this bill is what allows us to unlock the Trump agenda.
Fingers crossed. Brandon, thank you so much. Come back and join us, please. All right. Senator Ron Johnson's going to give us the Senate version of all this budget stuff. You know, he's a budget hawk. We'll talk to him about that in just a moment. Before we talk to him, let's talk about putting our money where our morals are. You can do that with your watch, you know that. It can be hard out there when you're out, whatever you have to buy, whether you need a plumber or a new pair of shoes. Who shares your values? What companies are bold enough to speak up about your values? Well, look, I could tell you about Wasson Watch just with how they look, with the quality of it, because they're really, really nice watches, but that's not what impressed me. What impressed me is Paul is a United States Marine. That impressed me. Fought for this country. What impressed me is Wasson Watch will routinely, boldly speak out on our behalf in cultural issues, completely unafraid, not just worried about the bottom line, worried about the United States of America. How many companies do that? That's why I love them. I love them, and I'll tell you, that's where I get my watches. You need a watch? You need a good gift idea for somebody in your life? 10% off at wassonwatch.com with the promo code Jesse. We'll be back.
And in the near future, I want to do what has not been done in 24 years, balance the federal budget. We're going to balance it.
I liked it too. I want to balance the federal budget myself, but I want to lose 10 pounds. I got extra fat over the last 10 months, yet I just ate a pizza a while ago. So do I actually want to lose the 10 pounds? Joining me now, the great senator from the state of Wisconsin. Let's find out if we actually do want to balance the federal budget. Senator, it's a great applause line. Thought it was interesting. All the Republicans in there stood up and clapped. So that's what they say. What are they doing?
Well, in order to do it, we have to concentrate on spending. We don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. We have a horrible tax code, and I'd love to simplify and rationalize it. I think that would be pro-growth, and economic growth is a huge component of the solution here. But we have to return to a reasonable pre-pandemic level spending. I've laid out four different options. Right now, we'll spend about $7.3 trillion this year. 2019, we spent at $4.4 trillion. If you take that spending, use today's Social Security, Medicare, and interest on the debt, those you spend what you spend, but all the other spending, you just increase by the growth in population and inflation, we'd be spending $6.5 trillion, which is about $800 billion less than we're spending. Now, the House budget says they're going to save $150 billion each year. What I'm saying is minimum we ought to be saving $800 billion. But if you go back to Bill Clinton's budget, 1998, I don't think Bill Clinton was spending too little. And grow that by population inflation, use today's Social Security, Medicare, that'd be $5.5 trillion. We'd be real close to balanced budget. Now, do we have the wherewithal? Do we have the will to do that? Right now, when I start talking inside the conference, I think people are already throwing in the towel, when I'm 3 words into what I'm saying. I presented them a new chart today showing, where exactly those savings would occur. Right now, it's $550 billion in other mandatory spending, not Social Security, not Medicare, other mandatory. If you exclude Medicaid from that, you got $484 billion. So still almost $500 billion that is beyond just spending growth from 2019, population inflation. So that's $500 billion that actually should be pretty easy to trim. Just use that control. Spend what we spent in 2019, all these programs, but only allow it to grow by inflation and population. That'll save $500 billion right there.
Senator, I hate to make you nerd out on the details, but what's in that other mandatory spending? You ask people about mandatory spending. If they know anything about this, they would say Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. Everyone gets those, but $500 billion in other spending? That's quite an other category. What's in that?
Well, actually, it's $1.3 trillion in other mandatory spending, total spending. And it's income security, it's education, it's training, it's just a host of things. Again, that even excludes Medicaid. If you throw Medicaid in, there's about $1.9 trillion in total. And by the way, when we hear them talking about Medicaid, think Obamacare, because what's really destroying Medicaid is Obamacare. We pay 90 cents on the dollar for working age, able-bodied adults for their health care. And as a result, states game the system. They tax the providers, and they get 90 cents on the dollar on the tax. It's a gimmick. It's legalized fraud in my book. And so states could care less about whether the Medicaid recipients are eligible because they get 90 cents on the dollar and they're able to pay taxes on it. They allow providers to probably overcharge them on things. It's a huge scam. It's exploding. But it's Obamacare. It's the Medicaid expansion, which is Obamacare, that's really destroying Medicaid again. So for single, able-bodied, working-age adults, we pay 90 cents on the dollar. For a disabled child, we pay 50 or 60 cents on the dollar. We make the states pick up the tab. And then, by the way, that's the way Medicaid was designed, is to have a shared program between the federal government and the states, so the states would administer it and they would control it, because they don't want to see their budgets explode. So there was some fiscal responsibility with Medicaid back then when it was true Medicaid. Now with Obamacare, there's no fiscal responsibility, and it's exploding. So that's, again, but even if you leave that off, you still have $484 billion above and beyond population growth and inflation of 2019 spending. If you go back to Obama in 2014, your budget would be 6.2. If you go back to Clinton in 1998, that'd be $5.5 trillion baseline. Again, you always hear my colleagues talk about zero-based budgeting, right? Well, if they were serious about it, at a minimum, they would embrace a $5.5 to $6.5 trillion base budget, right? Start from there. If you got to add some defense to Clinton's budget, okay. By the way, Lindsey Graham embraced this approach. He took a fourth option, which was President Trump's last budget, his projection for 2025. That's where we got the Senate budget number of $6.061 trillion. That's our goal. That's what we passed in our budget reconciliation to fund the border and fund defense. And by the way, I insisted that we pay for that year on year. So rather than the way we normally pay for $342 billion spending over 4 years, pay for it over 10, I said, no, if it's going to be spent in 4, we're going to pay for it in 4. And so that's $85.5 billion per year savings is what the instructions are. And the score on that then is $850 billion, more than half of what is in the House's big, beautiful single bill. So in our first limited, skinny budget resolution, we are going to get more than half of what the House savings would be over their entire big, beautiful budget. It just shows, again, I appreciate what the House is trying to do. I understand kind of the machinations of it, but in the end, their spending restraint is completely inadequate. They go from 7.3 trillion to about 7.1 best case. It's completely inadequate. You'll never balance the budget that way. So if Trump's serious about balancing the budget, go back to his speech. That's what he told U.S. senators down in Mar-a-Lago a couple of weeks ago as well. He has to get serious about spending. We just came from lunch with Elon Musk. He thinks he's going to identify about $1 trillion a year of waste, fraud, and abuse. He's on track. Over $4 billion a day is what his Doge team is looking at. How do you translate what he's finding into legislation? We can do it through rescission, possibly impoundment, but the courts may stop that, but through reconciliation. And that's why the $500 billion of other mandatory, we can do that through reconciliation, then the appropriation process. So again, there's multiple ways we can attack this. We have to attack it every single way, but it starts, Jesse, with acknowledging that we have to return to a reasonable pre-pandemic level of spending, that the 7.3 trillion is grotesquely unreasonable. But if you start there and then try and find 3 or 4 major programs to cut, I mean, you're not going to do it. You're death by 1,000 cuts, and that's really what the House experienced. So you got to start at a reasonable baseline. You got to build it from there, fine. But from my standpoint, the absolute top budget number should be 6.5. The Senate starting at about 6.1 trillion.
All right, Senator, real quick, where are we in all this? It seemed like we were kind of sailing. The Senate has one, the House has one, there's reconciliation. Now you're getting the panic voices from D.C. There's going to be a shutdown. We're not sure. Where are we at in all this?
Well, again, a shutdown is something completely different. That's how do you fund the rest of fiscal year 2025 when Chuck Schumer wouldn't bring up any appropriation bills, so we're on a continuing resolution. The White House now is behind a pretty simple, basic continuing resolution. I support that. They're not going to help us through appropriation bills, and if we do that, we're going to overspend there. So 2025 is wasted. Okay, we're going to spend what we spend. Best to do it as with little damage as possible with a 1-year CR. We've got to craft that to not give Democrats an excuse for voting it down, because we'll need 7 of them in the Senate here. So, I mean, we've got to craft a CI with no poison pills, just continue resolution that if the Democrats refuse, they get blamed for the shutdown. And by the way, you don't shut down much of the government. You just shut down the painful parts. You shut down the stuff people like national parks. But the good news with President Trump in the Oval Office, if we have a shutdown, he'll make it the least painful as possible. When Democrats in charge, they try and make it the most painful.
Of course. Senator, thank you, sir. All right. We still have a bunch more to get to. We're going to talk to Jordan Schachtel next, talk about the gold card and things like that. Let me talk to you about sleeping well. Sleep well last night? Do you sleep well every night? Is it a guarantee that you will sleep well tonight? As you get older, I admit, it gets harder. I was 10 years old. My bed caught on fire one time. That's a true story, and I slept through it. My parents had to come wake me up. Anymore, not so much. So that's why I have Dream Powder from Beam. It's all natural. It's a cup of hot chocolate, only it's special hot chocolate, not just because it's delicious. It has melatonin and things like that in it, and you sip on it, and you drift off to sleep. And the difference is when you wake up, you feel so good. You feel rested because it's not drugs. It's natural stuff. You went up to 40% off. Try a bag. Try a bag of Dream Powder. You'll never look back. Shopbeam.com/Jesse Kelly. We'll be back.
Tariffs are about making America rich again and making America great again, and it's happening, and it will happen rather quickly. There'll be a little disturbance, but we're okay with that. It won't be much. No, you're not. Oh.
A little disturbance. I don't know what it will be. There are a couple things happening here. Donald Trump, yes, he uses tariffs as a negotiating tactic. He wants this from Canada. He wants that. Yes, he also loves tariffs. Donald Trump is a Teddy Roosevelt Republican. I keep telling people this. It's not like we've never seen this before. We've seen it before. There have been plenty of Republicans like this. Let's talk to Jordan Schachtel about it, independent journalist. His Substack, The Dossier, is one of my favorites out there. Jordan, okay, disturbance can mean a lot of different things, right? Trade wars can descend into full-blown disaster for people. They can also be necessary evils sometimes. What say you?
I appreciate you having me on. Yeah, so I would probably fall into the camp, if all things being equal, I wouldn't be a Teddy Roosevelt tariff guy. But I think Trump has an interesting situation at his hands. We live in a world in which the vast majority of world leaders are feckless cowards who prefer sound bites over sound policy. So you have the Justin Trudeau's, Keir Starmer's, Emmanuel Macron's of the world, and Trump can read these people like a book. And he knows that if you ratchet up the pressure on them, they'll fold pretty easily. And it's a good bet for the interest of the American people. You know, we've had these lopsided trade policies and relations with these other countries that have basically considered America as this kind of globalist liberal state that's just willing to hand out freebies and get screwed everywhere it goes in exchange for being interpreted as the good guy. But I think under Trump, there's very different policy now. And I think the second issue here is the issue with China, which doesn't necessarily, I don't think the play necessarily is that he perceives weak leadership, but you know, the fentanyl issue is very real. China's trying to compete with us at the highest levels. 200 Americans, I think, every day are dying of fentanyl overdoses. So it's a major problem. You know, now that we got the border secured, we need to stop some fentanyl from entering the United States and, you know, putting some pressure on China, that seems to use basically the fentanyl as a weapon to try to make the U.S. implode within itself. It's a really good tactic in my view, and it's more important than any type of stock market index to curb the fentanyl flow.
Jordan, let's focus on Canada and Mexico here briefly. I have people I trust, a lot smarter people than I, tell me that tariffs like this on Canada and Mexico, it pretty much instantly puts them in a recession. It puts them in a brutal position. So why not just come to the table immediately if you're Canada and Mexico? I know you don't want to. I'm sure you're loving the high life of being able to screw us every single way. But if it's that or a recession, you really have to come to the table, right?
Exactly. There's no replacing the power of the American, the political capital that we can expend, and also the power of our economy. Canada and Mexico produce fractions of a fraction of what we can produce, and the weight of the dollar. And the reality is that these are left-wing leaders that don't particularly, are particularly fond of President Trump. So I think that they're trying to negotiate behind closed doors. And President Trump just alluded to this in a Truth Social post, where he said he had a call with Trudeau, and it ended somewhat nicely, but then he saw Trudeau ripping him on social media and in public. So this is kind of how it goes. I think you'll see in the coming days that Canada and Mexico will fold, and we'll get better terms for the American people.
Okay, let's switch to something I don't like, actually, if I'm being frank. Trump talked about it last night, the gold card. Here he was.
With that goal in mind, we have developed in great detail what we are calling the gold card, which goes on sale very, very soon. For $5 million, we will allow the most successful job-creating people from all over the world to buy a path to U.S. citizenship. It's like the green card, but better and more sophisticated. And these people will have to pay tax in our country. They won't have to pay tax from where they came. The money that they've made, you wouldn't want to do that, but they have to pay tax, create jobs. We will now bring in brilliant, hardworking, job-creating people. They're going to pay a lot of money, and we're going to reduce our debt with that money.
Jordan, obviously Donald Trump, as I've said many times, intends to do big things with his 4 years. He's not going to play it safe. I'm going to love some of those things. I'm going to hate some of those things. I get reducing the debt if the money would actually go to that. I don't think American citizenship should be for sale. What say you?
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I'm struggling with this one, although there is a system in place for people to try to purchase their way into citizenship, and it costs around $900,000 today. So, and from what I understand, that program there's rampant fraud and abuse, hundreds of millions of dollars over recent years. There was this ski resort in Vermont that they were using as kind of a vehicle. There's a famous case out of Colorado. So I think that at the very least, they'll try to remove the fraud from the program. If you have this new Trump Gold card, at least it kind of resets it. And the fact of the matter is, if you run the numbers for some points for your position, there's only maybe hundreds of thousands of people outside the United States who can afford to buy the Trump Gold card and have that kind of liquidity that they can dump $5 million into buying citizenship. So, worst case scenario for you, at least, is that it goes into play and then no one can really afford it. Yeah, I agree with you. I have a hard time seeing that it would pay down the debt. It seems that governments are just too greedy. They see the inflows and they just want to use it for something else. But I'm hopeful it can at least remove the fraud from the older program.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, let's switch gears, do some foreign policy stuff, Jordan. So the mixed messaging, the ups and downs with the whole Zelensky thing is about enough to give people whiplash at this point in time. Zelensky shows up to the White House, poops his pants. Then over the weekend, he's courting Europe. Then all of a sudden, he's ready for a deal. He's about to sign a deal. About 5 minutes ago, he comes out and said he's not ready for a deal. Where is this thing going?
Yeah, Zelensky's come crawling back to the United States. He went to Europe for a little bit, went to London, met with all of our NATO allies, including Mr. Starmer, the British Prime Minister. They made all of these public declarations. Next thing you know, Zelensky fires out a series of posts. He's basically begging to get back into the mineral deal because he knows that the Europeans aren't really good for anything. There's dozens of NATO countries that aren't living up to their commitment to spend a certain amount to maintain the thresholds. So like the whole point of our alliance is kind of being put in question. And these are the same nations that claim that they're going to be able to bail out Ukraine in this war against Russia. Unfortunately, the U.S. Military has been propping up the entirety of Europe for decades now. Europe has been so delinquent in their duties because they've wanted to spend all their money on social welfare programs and climate hoax stuff and the like and DEI and all kinds of craziness. So we're left with the ones with this enormous responsibility. I think Zelensky thought that the rhetoric of the Europeans and Trudeau that they were going to send fighter jets and tanks was legitimate, and then he met with them behind closed doors, totally panicked, and now there's reports that a mineral deal with the United States is imminent. I think it would be very smart for him to sign it, because if you have American commercial interests in eastern Ukraine, that gives Putin more reason to not want to pursue any further because he doesn't want to get into conflict with the United States directly. So I think the mineral deal is great for the US because we finally get something out of the $350 billion we've allocated to that country. And it's good for Zelensky if he actually wants security and stability.
He is at the dossier on Substack. Go subscribe. Jordan, thank you so much, brother. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jesse.
All right. Lighten the mood. Next. All right. It is time to lighten the mood. And for Lighten the Mood, I actually have to point out a publication which I love. It's called Twitchy. They advertise something that I did on social media. I got tired of people comparing every single thing in the world to World War II. So yesterday on social media, on X or Twitter, whatever you call it, yesterday I went on this long spiel where I made sure I compared every single thing to World War II the entire time. And they wrote an article about it, and it's probably worth checking out because it was friggin' hilarious. And if you're in to World War II, by the way, I should point out that you can go, I'm going to be posting a World War II special on my YouTube channel. So go to @JesseKellyDC on YouTube, subscribe to it, and enjoy. All right? All right. I'll see you tomorrow. I would thank you for coming to my YouTube channel, but I know how brilliant it is, and I know you love it here. So subscribe and watch. We're going to start really ramping things up and putting some funny stuff, some interesting stuff out there, some collaborations. Either way, my YouTube channel is officially the place to be. So stick around.